Today I was like busy with like stuff and I didn't really follow the news until just now. It's about a quarter to nine as I'm recording this, quarter to 9 p.m. local time. And I found out that Boris Johnson came to, once again unannounced, came to visit Zelensky. And see, what was it? A day or two ago, Schultz, Macron, and Draghi, the leaders of Germany, France, and Italy, respectively, came to visit Zelensky. And the word is that they came to tell him, you got to negotiate. You got to negotiate with the Russians, right? And Johnson came and basically said, you can't negotiate with the Russians. You can't. Now, Johnson, of course, is speaking not just for the United Kingdom, he's also speaking for the United States, right? Because the Americans right now find themselves in this very, very complicated position. Because you see, for the Russians, this war, they have to win it. They have to. It's existential. And it's not an issue of like Putin's ambition. Everybody in Russia, in the leadership classes of Russia, in the upper classes, the professional classes of Russia, they all see this war as existential. They have to win it. And now that they've gone in, it's sort of like, screw it, let's go for broke. Let's take over the whole place. That's their aim. Their aim is to take over all of Ukraine. They have to, okay? It's not an issue of like them, the Russians having this desire for conquest of Ukraine. Putin has been in power for over 20 years. If the ambition, the true ambition of the Putin regime was to invade and capture Ukraine, they would have been making moves in that direction long ago. It's because NATO tried to expand into Ukraine. The United States tried to expand into Ukraine. And so for the Russians, this is existential. They have to win it, no matter what. And the Americans have sort of like boxed themselves in with their rhetoric. Sort of like they have to win. But now that it's very clear that the Ukrainian armed forces are losing catastrophically, they can't quite walk it back, but they can't have a loss. They can't have a negotiated peace. There are certain segments of the American political establishment, bureaucratic establishment, specifically in the State Department, Anthony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, the usual suspects, who want the war to continue to the last Ukrainian man, woman, or child. I mean, you got to understand that. But in general, the Biden administration is boxed in. It cannot walk back its incendiary rhetoric of the last 4 months. And for various reasons, the Brits can't either. Johnson can't either. And Johnson is basically vocalizing what the hawkish view of the Atlanticists want. That is, for this war to continue. Now, the Europeans want it to end, to negotiate a ceasefire and an end to everything because of the economic problems that they are realizing that they're going to have to be dealing with. And so, you have this impasse between what the Brits want and what the Europeans want, what the Americans want and what the Russians want. Bottom line, I don't think that there's going to be any negotiation. This is going to go to the very end, to the very bitter end. A lot of people think that this war is going to last many more months, perhaps a year, perhaps years, plural. I actually don't think so. I actually think that this war might be over much, much sooner than anybody can realize. Because the number of Ukrainian soldiers who are being needlessly killed, this is the most catastrophic thing that has ever happened to this beautiful country. These young men who are dying for nothing, once they are all dead, there will be nothing to stop the Russian army from taking over the whole country. For the Russians, yes, there will come a moment where they're going to have to call up reservists in Russia because they're going to need reservists, just manpower, in order to occupy all of Ukraine. And that's their intention. That's what they will wind up doing. It's not what they wanted to do when this war started. But wars have a logic of their own. The Russians never really wanted to invade Ukraine and take over territory. But once they had to fight for Kherson and Zaporozhye and the Donbass and in Kharkov, well, then it takes on a logic of its own. It's like basically, well, we fought so hard to take this territory. Why are we supposed to give it up now? We're not going to give it up now. We're not going to negotiate it away. We're going to keep it. Because our boys fought and died for this land. It's ours now. I mean, you see the logic here. And so the negotiations, the Ukrainians are going to say, we're not going to give up any territory, and the Russians are going to say, we're not going to give up any territory either. So the war is just going to continue to the natural end. It's going to continue to the unconditional surrender of Ukraine. And the Americans, here comes the tricky part. The Americans, see, they can't afford to have a total loss in Ukraine. And unconditional surrender by Ukraine would be a total loss. If they have this total loss, it would be so humiliating and catastrophic for the Biden administration, especially as it comes up to the November elections, that they would have to escalate it somehow. And it would have to be a direct escalation. Many very smart people in the commentary community are saying that the Americans might try to make some move in Syria, use Israel as a proxy in Syria, perhaps even attack Iran, stir trouble elsewhere for the Russians. But it's not going to have the same punch, politically speaking, to stir up trouble for the Russians in Syria compared to an outright loss in Ukraine. Because politically, in the minds of most observers, Syria and Ukraine are two separate countries, two separate continents practically, even though when you look at the map, they're right next door to each other, and they're a lot closer than is readily apparent, at least in your imagination, right? And geopolitically, well, it's basically the same problem. It's basically the United States against Russia. But, you see, politically, you can't make hay out of escalation in Syria. It's certainly not counteract the catastrophe of a loss in Ukraine. And so the Biden administration is going to find itself very shortly with the problem of whether it actually commits American forces, NATO forces, to a war against Russia in Ukraine. At this time, I think that the Americans are going to back off, especially if the Russians make a major call for reservists from Russia to go to Ukraine. Because you have to understand, Ukraine is huge. It's an enormous country. I mean, I've said many times before, I've ridden across the whole thing. It took me 4 days on a motorcycle, without any shelling going on around me on pristine highways, right? It took me 4 days. It's huge. And so if the Russians want to capture Ukraine, they're going to need a lot of reservists, not for combat, but rather just for occupational purposes, to police this enormous country. You see? I mean, you're going to need, I wouldn't know exactly how many people you'd need, but you'd need, I would guess offhand, 300,000, 500,000 men on the ground to really control Ukraine. And so that's what the Russians are going to have to do. And, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point of this video is I just want to say that negotiations aren't going to happen. Because the Americans and the Russians, they both need to win this. And from both of their perspectives, it is so essential that they win it that there's no longer any room to negotiate. And the Zelensky regime, from the orders it's gotten from Boris Johnson, now basically the only thing that they can say is, oh yes, we will negotiate if Russia removes itself from the entirety of the Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. It's just not going to happen. And so, as a practical matter, there isn't going to be any negotiation. There's only going to be the absolute destruction of Ukraine. And this is a tragedy. This is just a tragedy.